Barney and Grace had been together for 3 years now, and everything seemed to be going well for them. They had overcome many hardships together and shared joyful moments. But lately, something began to change. Barney noticed that Grace had become overly social with other men, even in his presence. The first signs of her changes were evident at a party at their friend's house. Grace was jokingly chatting with other men, and Barney couldn't help but notice her exchanging glances with one of them. His confidence in her fidelity was beginning to waver. Barney's doubts were growing by the day. He began to notice how she hid messages and calls on her phone, and how her behavior became more mysterious. It was all beginning to tear at his soul, and he decided it was time to figure it all out. Barney devised his plan. He realized that he couldn't test Jessica on his own without revealing his intentions, so he turned to his old friend Steve, who was always ready to help. That evening, in a secluded corner of the bar, Barney shared his suspicions about Jessica with Steve. Steve was amazed to see Barney suffering over his doubts and agreed to help his friend in testing his wife's fidelity. Barney offered Steve the role of tempter. Steve was to drive up to Jessica in his luxury sports car, pose as a stranger and start flirting with her, offering her a ride. The task was simple: observe Jessica's reaction and find out how much she succumbed to the temptation. Steve was hesitant at first, but he realized how much Barney needed this test. He agreed to fulfill his role in this difficult and emotionally intense test and was willing to meet Jessica, introducing himself as a stranger. The next day, Barney was urgently away on a business trip for a few days, but the planned test plan was still on track. That evening, Steve drove up to the house where Barney and Grace lived in his red sports car. He pretended to be lost in their town and asked Jessica for help with the road. Grace walked out of the house with a smile, not realizing that he was part of Barney's plan. Soon they were in his sports car and cruising the picturesque streets of the town. Steve began flirting, creating an atmosphere of play and teasing. Grace didn't seem to mind his attention and even responded to his compliments. They stopped at the ocean shore, and that walk quickly turned into an exciting adventure, filling Jessica with adrenaline and attraction. On their return to the car, Steve offered her a glass of wine and suggested they dance. The music was blaring loudly, and they began to dance very close to each other. At one point, their lips connected in a kiss that proved to be the point of no return. The very test of fidelity had gone too far, and they couldn't stop. Steve and Grace spent the night together. The next day, Steve lied to Barney, claiming that Grace had successfully passed the test and hadn't even spoken to her for an extended period of time. Barney was relieved to believe this lie, feeling foolish for doubting his wife's fidelity. However, secretly from Barney, Grace and Steve continued their meetings. Grace struggled with the feelings tearing her apart, trying to reconcile her new passions with her guilt toward her husband. She continued to hide her encounters with Steve, making up false stories about seeing her friends. Steve, for his part, was also captive to this dangerous bond. He found it hard to accept lying to his friend, but he couldn't stop seeing Jessica. Their relationship was growing, and they knew that sooner or later all the secrets would come out, and they would have to face the consequences of their act. For Grace and Steve, the moment of truth came after learning of Grace's pregnancy, an unexpected turn of events that forced them to look at their actions from a new perspective. Grace couldn't say with certainty who the father of the unborn child was and had to come clean. For Barney, it was a real shock. After the birth of the girl, Grace and Barney decided to conduct a paternity test. The results were devastating. The girl was not Barney's daughter. This discovery shocked them both and challenged everything they believed in. Barney was seized with rage and frustration, and this led to a rash and dangerous decision. In a fit of anger, he started a fire, burning Steve's sports car where they had spent nights of passion. The fire quickly spread and engulfed the house where Steve was staying. Upon learning of the fire, Grace rushed to Steve's aid, despite her own danger. In the blazing house, she suffered severe facial burns, and Steve died in the fire. Now the lives of all the characters took a tragic turn, and Barney was arrested for arson and the murder of a friend. Grace was left alone with a contorted face and a baby, and nothing could bring back what they had lost. Barney ended up behind bars for 8 years. His life in prison was bleak and bereft of freedom. He lived with the guilt of burning Steve's car and the death of his friend. Barney made new friends in prison, including people who had committed various crimes. He had to learn how to survive and adapt to the new realities of prison life. Grace, with a disfigured face, was left alone with a baby. She underwent a series of surgeries to restore her appearance, but the past never let her go. She became a victim of her own mistakes and a victim of fate. Growing up without a father and surrounded by secrecy and pain, the child witnessed difficult trials. Her childhood was tainted by tragedy and hardship. The fate of all the characters was intertwined in a tangled story, and they all paid their share of pain, suffering, and loss. There were unexpected twists and turns in their lives that changed their destinies forever, leaving a bitter taste of pain and disappointment.